For the past couple of years, I've had the same job. I'm a janitor for a popular fast food restaurant. I don't take orders or anything aside from cleaning. I don't even see other workers a lot of the time because I'm scheduled overnight. At the restaurant, everything needs to be deep cleaned every day, and during open hours, it's basically impossible to do. I'd never had anything happen during my shifts, aside from the occasional customer knocking on the window asking if we were open. So on this night, I came in and got to work like I usually did. A couple of other employees were still there when I arrived, but by 10 p.m., which was an hour after closing, it was just me for the rest of the night. I popped in my headphones and started scraping the grills and prepping everything that needed to be hosed down. After a while, I lost track of time, but my best guess is that it was around 12 a.m. when I heard a knock at the front of the building. I pulled off my headphones, hearing it again. I walked to the front, expecting someone at the door wanting to see if we were closed. But when I looked, nobody was there. I went up to the door and looked out at the parking lot. No cars or people. I knew I'd heard it from this side of the building, though, so I waited for it again, but there was nothing. I ended up thinking I just mistook another sound for knocking and went back to work. Another hour or so went by, then I took a lunch break. I grabbed my lunch bag and sat at one of the tables in the middle of the dining area, taking my time since I was actually ahead on my cleaning. Once I finished eating, I went to the back and turned to grab the mop, only to see a man's face staring at me from outside the drive-through window. He had messy hair and a blank expression, but his eyes had something strange about them, like they were empty. I froze for a second, and after a moment, the man calmly turned and walked away. My heart was racing in my chest, and I just stood in place, listening to his departing footsteps. I didn't know what to think. It was just incredibly creepy and strange. Once I got my confidence back, I opened the window and looked out to make sure he had left. It was dark beyond the light of the restaurant, but I didn't see anyone, so I closed it up and locked it. I was on edge for the next hour, constantly looking behind me at the windows, feeling like I was being watched. But as my shift was coming to an end, I started to feel some relief, and the anxiety calmed down. One of the last few things I had to do was roll all the garbage bags out to the dumpster, which I was avoiding for as long as I could. I checked the window before I stepped out, and it looked clear, so I quickly opened the door and got the garbage out. I started tossing the bags one by one into the dumpster, but not even 20 seconds in, the man appeared from around the corner. I stopped what I was doing and quickly asked what he needed. He didn't respond as he walked up to me, and he had that same empty stare. Now that I could see his whole body, though he was even more terrifying, being a fairly large man and wearing a dirty and stained coat. Not knowing what else to do, I ran for the door. I opened it as the man's footsteps rushed up behind me, and as I slammed the door shut, the man was able to stick his arm into the gap, preventing it from closing. I turned and sprinted to the other end of the restaurant, getting my keys out and unlocking the front door as fast as I could, all while hearing the man closing the distance on me. I barely got away again and ran before he got to me. I sprinted across the parking lot and as far as I could while calling the police. 5 minutes later, the police arrived at the restaurant, but the man was gone. We got footage from the CCTV cameras, but no identity could be made of it. The footage also showed that as soon as I ran away, the man just stood there and watched me for a bit, then left out the back door. What he wanted from me is unknown, but his creepy and objectively horrifying behavior gives me chills even to this day. I work as a cybersecurity analyst for a large office company in my town. I had just started my first job in the field, so of course, I had to work the shift that nobody else wanted. Overnight, Working overnight wasn't as terrible as I thought, though. It was actually pretty peaceful. My job mainly consisted of looking through log files to make sure nothing sketchy happened while the rest of the crew was sleeping. This meant I was pretty much alone in the office building for several hours. I'd fall asleep pretty often, as staring at a screen for hours on end in the middle of the night was hard on my eyes. With nobody there to keep me company, staying awake wasn't very easy. I started setting soft alarms on my phone to go off every hour, just to make sure I didn't sleep through my entire shift. I had been working this job for about 4 months when this happened, and I actually still work there now. It was a regular night, and my coworker had just finished his shift at 12 o'clock and left the building. A couple of minutes later, I got up, started the coffee machine, and then walked down the main hallway to do a general check for anyone still in the building. This was my regular routine just to make myself feel more comfortable. I sat back down at my desk, took out my phone to turn on the alarms, and continued with my work. It was about 20 minutes later when I realized I had never heard the coffee machine beep to indicate it was done. I went to check on it. I walked down the hall to the small coffee desk and saw that there was no coffee in the pot. Then I noticed that the entire coffee machine was turned off. I thought it was weird, but that's about it. I just turned it back on and went back to my desk. As soon as I sat down, I noticed my phone wasn't where I had left it on the desk. I patted down my pockets and ran back to the coffee desk, but it wasn't there either. I played it back in my memory and knew for sure that I had placed it right on my desk, next to my keyboard. I started to get really freaked out and looked around frantically. My desk was in the middle of a large room with other desks and computers, and I suddenly felt like I was being watched. Standing there, knowing someone else had to be in the building with me, I nervously called out in a shaky voice, hoping my friend was just playing a prank on me. I waited for a few seconds, but there was no reply. As I stood by my desk, another few seconds passed before I heard soft shuffling coming from behind a desk in the far corner. Almost immediately after, my phone alarm rang from the opposite corner of the room. My first thought was that there were probably 2 unknown strangers in the room with me. Instinctively, I started running for the door. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me as I made it out, but I didn't take any chances. I ran across the street to a neighboring gas station and called 911 from their phone to report the unknown people in our office building. The police arrived quicker than I expected and searched the building. They brought out a man after only a few minutes, though I didn't recognize him at all. They also retrieved my phone, which they found behind some boxes in the corner of the office. The man was found with a small knife in his pocket. The next day, we got more information about what had really taken place. Apparently, the man was an old employee who had been fired recently, before I started working there. He told the police he was trying to scare me to get me to leave the building so he could take back his company laptop. Apparently, he had information he wanted from it, at least that's what he claimed. It all seemed really weird to me, and I wasn't sure if I trusted his reasoning for breaking in. However, my coworkers did say they remembered the guy, and he was definitely a little strange. I'm glad I got out of there when I did, because I'm not sure what would have happened if his plan hadn't worked and I had chosen to stay in the building. I work at a small retail store. It shouldn't be any surprise to hear that I hate it there. The work, the customers, even some of the coworkers. But it's my first job and really the only one I was able to get with no experience. Over winter break, my school was out for 3 weeks, which meant I wasn't forced to only work closing shifts. I talked to my manager, who said I could take up a few overnight shifts if I wanted. I gladly accepted, knowing I wouldn't have to deal with customers and could mostly work at my own pace. I knew the overnight manager, Chris, and when I came in for my first overnight, he showed me what to get done and left me to do it. It was just the two of us, working on opposite ends of the store. Being overnight, though, it was really nice getting to work in peace and even listen to music as I did. But it only took a couple of hours for the fun of it to wear off. I was actually getting really bored and even a little sleepy, not talking to a single person. It was just past 1 a.m., so I let Chris know I was going to take my 15. I grabbed my lunch from the fridge in the break room, then left the building and sat in my car. I scarfed down my food, hoping to have 10 minutes for a quick nap. But before I rested my eyes, I noticed someone standing next to the building. The entire parking lot was empty and dark, with only the lights from inside the retail store on, so there was no reason for anyone to be there. The guy was looking into the windows like he was trying to see inside. It was so odd that I felt like I had to stay awake to watch him. He looked like a pretty tall guy with short hair, wearing a dark leather jacket and some old boots. I watched him for the rest of my break, so a whole 10 minutes, and the guy still stood outside just watching through the windows of our store. When it was time to clock back in, I got out and started walking toward the front doors. I was walking fast, hoping to slip by without the guy having a chance to stop me. But before I even got halfway through the parking lot, he spun around and looked at me. His eyes were dead and sleepless, and he had a blank face. I kept walking, trying to make it to the door, but the guy immediately started walking toward me. He was maybe 10 feet away as I came up and started unlocking the door. He called out to me as I hurried inside and locked it behind me. I just ignored him out of a gut feeling that he was up to no good. Maybe it was harsh of me to not at least see what he wanted, but at the time I just had a really bad feeling about him. I made my way to the back to use the bathroom, then was back on the sales floor a few minutes later. I wanted to get back to work, but I felt tempted to check on the front windows and see if the guy was still creeping around out there. So I walked up to the front, expecting to see his creepy eyes staring through the window, but he wasn't there, not even anywhere in the parking lot. I figured he had left for good, so I went back to the aisle I was working in. Another few minutes went by. It was probably 1:30 by now, when suddenly the alarm sounded through the building. I knew exactly what it was right away. It was the back door in the storage area of the building. Sometimes the managers would toss stuff in the dumpster out back and accidentally trip the alarm, but with only Chris working, it seemed really unlikely. I started making my way to the back of the store, but the closer I got to the doors of the storage room, the more that bad feeling crept up inside me. If it was Chris, surely he would have shut off the alarm by now. Then I got to the back, and just before I entered, I heard a bunch of thuds coming from the other side. I quickly pushed open the door, and the sound stopped. Down the large hallway, I could see the back door wide open, and there was no sign of Chris anywhere. "Chris," I called out. He didn't respond, but a moment later, a head peered around the corner on the other end of the hallway. I recognized that man's creepy, dead look right away, and felt my whole body tense up. After hesitating, I went right back the way I came, not stopping for anything until I got outside and into my car. I called 911, and it was as I did that I realized I still had no idea where Chris was. Cops arrived quickly, running into the building and searching the whole place. Thankfully, they found Chris unharmed. He had locked himself in the manager's office after the guy broke in and chased him. He also explained the thud noises I heard, saying the man was pounding on the office door, trying to break it down. The guy ran away as soon as I did, so he was gone before the cops could get to him. We have a blurry image of his face from the security cameras, printed out and hung up on the back wall so other employees can keep a lookout for him. As far as we know, he hasn't come back, and there's no telling what he was trying to do that night. I'm just lucky that my gut feeling was working well. It was just past 11 p.m., and I was in the back room of our building, moving boxes around. It was just a regular hardware store, and I was an overnight stalker there. My coworker, who I usually worked with, was on vacation, so it was just me for the night. I didn't mind, though, because people always expect less from you when you're left alone to do all the work. So, if anything didn't get done, it wouldn't really matter. I was working slowly, taking my time. All the deliveries that came in during the day needed to be placed in the aisles where they belonged. I was breaking down pallets and putting boxes on carts that I would then roll into the main shopping area to stock. Once I had filled a few carts, I grabbed one and pushed it to the aisle on the far left. It was raining, or maybe even storming, pretty heavily outside. Through the rain, I thought I heard something from the front of the building. I didn't really care, not even crossing my mind for a second that it was anything other than the building making noises. I took a few boxes and started stocking, humming to myself to stave off the boredom. But then, again, I thought I heard something. I walked down to the front of the store and looked all the way to the other end where the front door was. There didn't seem to be anything or anyone. I stayed there for a little bit in no rush to work. Then it happened again. I could have sworn this time that I saw something moving by the front door, and that was where the sound seemed to come from. Being in my place of work with all the doors locked, I wasn't really afraid of anything, but I just wanted to make sure nothing strange was going on outside. I went up to the front door and looked out the glass, which I noticed had huge smudges and scratches on it. Nothing was outside. No cars or people, just heavy rain pouring down. I turned and started walking away, back to where I was working. It was quiet for a while, maybe a whole hour even. But then the sound came again from the front door. I dropped what I was doing immediately and walked back to the front. From across the store, I could clearly make out a figure moving around outside the door. I began walking closer before the figure stopped, stood still for a second, then ran away. I ran up to the door, trying to catch a glimpse of the person, but it was too dark and rainy. Looking at the door, though, there were definitely more marks on it than before. I was confident that this person was trying to break in. I pulled out my phone, still standing by the door, and called the police. The operator said it wouldn't be too long, just a few minutes. I put my phone back in my pocket and waited by the door, looking around. The parking lot was still empty, but then I turned my head to look against the building, and on the side was that same figure. I backed away quickly, worried that he may have seen me. I took several steps back and tried to be quiet. Not even 10 seconds later, the figure appeared right outside the door. While the glass was somewhat foggy and had raindrops all over it, I could tell he was looking at me. He slammed something against the window. It looked like maybe a large rock. Then he hit it again and again, trying to break the glass. I backed away faster and ran to the back of the store, locking myself in the office. Through the building, I heard the glass shatter and the alarm by the door go off. I waited in fear, hearing nothing else. A few minutes of silence passed, and I was growing more and more nervous until the police finally showed up. I heard them call out and walk around, searching the place before they got to the office, where I identified myself and told them what I knew. The guy wasn't in the store, so I guess after he broke the glass, he just left. Seems really weird and doesn't make any sense. Part of me even wishes that he had actually stolen something so that I'd at least know that was what he was after. But given that he didn't do anything after breaking down the door, I don't know what he wanted. And that is what still scares me to this day. I'm a receptionist at a local hotel, and most of my shifts are overnight. I'm in charge of the front desk, and my main responsibilities are to check in guests, answer phone calls, and keep an eye on the security cameras. It's usually a pretty quiet job since our hotel isn't the biggest or busiest. On this particular night, the hotel was mostly empty. There were only a few guests staying with us. I was sitting at the front desk on my phone when I saw a man start walking toward the doors outside. I stood up and greeted him when he came inside. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and said, "I need a room for the night." He was definitely high on something, but regardless, I checked him in and gave him a key to his room. It was standard to allow walk-in bookings when the hotel was less than 75% full. He started walking toward the elevators, and I sat back down and pulled out my phone. A few hours later, I was sitting at the front desk when I heard a noise coming from the hallway. It was a thump, sounding like a door trying to be forced open. I got up and walked around the corner to the end of the hallway. The man I had checked in a few hours ago was standing there, trying to open one of our maintenance doors. "Can I help you find something?" I asked. He looked over at me with those creepy eyes and asked again, but he just stared at me. I wasn't really sure what to think. Maybe he was really high and looking for the vending machine or something. I didn't know. I didn't want to anger the man, though, so I went back to my desk and tried to forget about it. A good amount of time passed with no activity. There were no sounds from any of the rooms, and nobody entered the building or walked through the halls. It was around 3 in the morning when I did a small walk around the bottom floor just to keep myself awake and busy. As I got to the hallway by the front desk, though, I heard a very sudden loud banging coming from one of the rooms. I stopped and listened for a moment, then went up the stairs to the second floor, where I thought it came from. It was very quiet now, which made me somewhat nervous. I walked down the hall, hearing nothing, but when I reached the end, one of the room's doors was open. I listened again for a second before lightly knocking. Nobody responded. I cautiously peeked inside, unsure of what to expect. It seemed empty. I wasn't comfortable walking all the way inside, though, so I couldn't really look around, but I was sure nobody was inside. I closed the door and looked at the room number, 112. That was the room I'd given to the man, but I never saw him exit the building. I quickly walked back down to the front desk and looked at all the security cameras we had in the lobby and outside the building, but the man didn't turn up. I jumped when the hotel phone rang. One of the rooms was calling. I picked it up. "Hello, how can I help you?" There was a woman on the line telling me about some man knocking on her door in the middle of the night. I apologized and assured her I would take care of it. I hung up and took a deep breath. I was getting really nervous now. I walked around the desk, but then again the phone started ringing. It was someone else from a different room this time, saying he had the same experience as the other woman. Someone knocking at his door in the middle of the night. I called the police right away and stood by the front doors until they arrived, just in case I needed a quick escape. Luckily, they came before anything happened, but they didn't find the man. Instead, they found a broken window in his room where he likely jumped out. It was on the second story, though, so I'm not sure how he managed to get away without some major injuries. Later, while the police were still searching, they got a report that the car he used to pay for the room was stolen. It's unclear what the man intended to do or why he was knocking on people's doors. I'm thankful none of them opened their doors, though, because this case could have been much worse if they had.